All right, so we are joined all the way from the beautiful city of Sarasota, Florida, by my dear friend and high school classmate. Hold on one second. Let me see. All right, so let me start over. We are joined all the way from the beautiful city of Sarasota, Florida, by my dear friend, high school classmate, Shawny Robey. Shawny Price Robey, graduate of Madison Central. We've got a room full here with me at Velma Jackson High School. We're recording this for all of our friends in Madison County schools, Rosa Scott, Madison Central, Ridgeland High School, Germantown High School, the Academic Options Center, and our YouTube channel. We thank you so much for joining us as always, especially during Black History Month. And we are in the Business Administration Career Cluster. So thank you for joining us for the third time for all the way down there from Southwest Florida.
Thank you so much, Greg, for having me, and thank you all for being here and listening to me for a little while. So I just appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Now, before we want to get into all you do at Lightshare, but obviously we want to start at the beginning. 1998 graduate of Madison Central. You were involved in a lot of things in high school. People don't believe that we used to eat lunch together every other day in choir. You were an excellent musician. But what you were most known for, you were an excellent student, but you were the first black tennis champion in the state of Mississippi history with only one loss in high school, and it was a controversial one at that. So just talk about your experience in high school and what it was like because you created a lot of fanfare for tennis in Mississippi.
Yes, well, I appreciate you asking. So, being at Madison Central was a really special time for me, and you being one of my closest friends, it was just it's a really wonderful time. But I will say that, going through things in high school, there's so many changes and so many things that take place. But kind of being the first to do anything is challenging. And being a black tennis player, especially during that time, there wasn't a lot of that on TV. You didn't see a lot. And at the time, you might have seen maybe Serena and Venus kind of cropping up around the same age. Um, but you didn't really see a whole lot of black tennis players. So it was very new concept for a lot of folks. But I was really focused on really wanting to do well, wanting to do well, whether it was academically, wanting to do well with my sports. I was very driven in that way. And I think at the time I think it's much bigger now, right, Greg? It was 5A. We were in kind of Division 5A. So fortunately, I was able to win every state championship in high school, and that worked out really well for me. And that did allow me to kind of parlay my way into getting a full scholarship at Southern Miss. Now that also presented a few challenges as well, seeing as though they had never recruited or had any black tennis players at Southern Miss either. And so
Yeah,
that
and
was
like, and that's a good
important.
point because we had never heard of Coco Golf. We had never heard of Sloane Stevens. Venus had just come about. We had never heard of Serena. So the concept of black tennis players in 1998 was the only one we'd ever heard of was Arthur Ashe. So it was a very foreign concept. And then, like we said, you went to Southern Miss where you were in the sorority with our art teacher, Miss Davis, there with Delta Sigma Theta. But I think I wanted to talk about that because I have a lot of athletes in here with me right now and a lot of athletes are going to see this. You were a Division 1 athlete, traveling the country, playing a Division 1 sport at a high level, but you were also a business administration major, going to very difficult classes and balancing academics with sports. And I just think for high school athletes on any level, it's very important to understand the jump that takes place and the level of commitment that is required of an athlete, whether it's football, baseball, whatever. And I always tell the story. And I know you remember our friend Marvin Young there at Southern Miss, and they had just played a football game in Birmingham, Alabama, the night before on a Thursday night on ESPN. They had gotten back at 1:30 in the morning, and he's walking across campus at 8 o'clock the next day. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He goes, man, I can't miss this test. So talk about that level of commitment because you guys would fly back and get back extremely late, and you'd have to be at class the next day.
Absolutely. So first I wanted to you had mentioned Miss Davis, and so just I wanted to shout out how wonderful she is, and she is my soror, my line sister. So I wanted to make sure I shouted her out before I continue. But yes,
Awesome.
the level of commitment that it takes, and we'll just go back to high school and then kind of move into college. In high school, there's a little more structure and guidance. In college, you are on your own and you do need to figure that out on your own. But it starts in high school in terms of developing the discipline. Um, in high school we have parents, guardians, friends, mentors that sort of help shape our day and tell us where we need to be. But it's really, really important in those high school years to focus on what you need to do, balance your own schedule, discipline yourself. Getting up early. It sounds silly because you don't want to get up early, but getting up early is really a key to a successful day. Getting up early and making sure all your homework is done. Getting up early and making sure that you've eaten and showered and that you're not rushing for the day. Getting up early, even practicing. I know when I got to Southern Miss, I was in the weight room at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it sounds crazy, but it had to be done because I was also on the court at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then I had class at 8 in the morning or 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. I also had class again in the afternoon. So these are the sorts of things that if you start to discipline yourself right now, it becomes so much easier when you get to college. It's easy also to be deterred because especially being an athlete, many of your friends are not having to do that. They're not having to be at practice. They have a little more time than you might have, and you want to do those things. Of course, you want to go to the parties. You want to do plenty of the other things, and I did too. However, I did miss a few things, and it's the sacrifice that you make, and I don't regret it for 1 minute. The friends that I chose to have around me when I was in high school were friends that supported what I did. Also, friends that had similar aspirations, and that's very, very important to surround yourself and look at your group of friends to say, are these the sort of people who are moving forward in life? Whether they're athletes or not, they might be dance majors. They want to go off to college. They want to start their own business. They want to be entrepreneurs. Whatever the case is, it is very, very important to surround yourself with people who have similar mindsets in order to be successful. Because if you look at your friends around you, you'll kind of see where you may be ending up as well. And same goes for college. So if you structure yourself accordingly in high school, surround yourself with people who have similar goals and aspirations. Once you get to college, it becomes much easier to do that because those are habits. Those are habits that you've already developed.
Yeah, and just looking around the room real quick, I think I've got five athletes in here. And in high school, a lot of times you see after they get back late, they're not at school the next day. They don't want to go to practice. I'm tired. In college, that's not going to work. Universities or even on the Division II level, on the JUCO level, they're investing money in you to be there. They expect to get a return on investment. So it really is. I
Absolutely.
cannot stress that enough for anybody that wants to play any sport on the
Yes.
college level. If anybody knows it's you, it is a grind. Now, is
It,
it
it
worth the
really
grind?
is.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I
Now,
want to I want to point out
oh, go
too,
ahead.
you had mentioned Division 1, Division 2. So I went to University of Southern Mississippi, which is a Division 1 school. Division 2, Division 3, NAIA, whatever the case, wherever you are going, especially if you're an athlete, they are investing in you. And it all counts. And it's all education. And if it's getting paid for, even better. But there is a cost associated with all of it, but it all counts and it's all very important. And I just don't want anyone to ever feel that, well, if it's not Division 1 or if it's not Division 2, it all counts and it all matters, because we're all going to be successful wherever we go. It's really what you make of it. It's what you make of the education that you get. It's what you make of the time that you have when you're there. It's what you make of the connections that you have when you're in school, whether it be high school or college or whatever the case.
Yeah, and I know you played before the NIL era, but even to keep the NIL money, you have to stay in school. You can't just not go to class. That NIL does have strings attached to it. I don't think a lot of people understand
Absolutely.
that. But that's a whole nother conversation for another day. Now, obviously, your career ended. I know you still play for fun and things, but your tennis career competitively ended in college. But you got a business degree and later an MBA. So talk about why you got the MBA and how it led you to be the CEO there of Lightshare in Sarasota.
Sure. So I want to make sure that people understand when you go to college, there's some people who know I want to be a doctor, and that's what's happening. I was not that kid, so don't feel bad that you maybe don't know what you want to do as soon as you step on a college campus. I had no idea what I meant to do. So when I got to college, I was on scholarship, and there's a point at which they will make you declare a major. So I had to kind of figure out what wanted to do. And so I decided to, I have a very creative mind. And I thought, well, maybe marketing would be something good for me. So I majored in business and I decided to have an emphasis in marketing. And that was at Southern Miss. And then I stayed there for graduate school. And then I obtained a master's in communication. That was my first master's degree. And so then when I got out of school, I started working in healthcare. And healthcare just was interesting to me. And I started doing marketing and PR and things like that, writing grants, those sorts of things. But then I became interested more on the business side as opposed to just the marketing side. So then I started to, and again, this is for all of you all. Sometimes you can't wait for an opportunity. You have to insert yourself in places
There you
where
go.
it might be uncomfortable for you. Because if people look at you like, well, you're in this box, you do marketing. That's what you do. But I wanted to do operations. I wanted to do other things that I found interesting. So I just had to insert myself in places and be in spaces where people then just started associating me with doing X, Y, or Z. Let me tell you something. If someone left a position, I was the first one to say, well, instead of hiring for that position, why don't you just let me do it for a while, at least on an interim basis, see how it works out. If it worked out, then I kept it. Something else happened. I said, well, why don't I take this project over? And so inserting yourself in places is very important. It's what I call just taking up space, taking up as much space in the room as possible so people can't think about moving forward without your involvement or your opinions or what have you. So that's kind of how I inserted myself onto more of the business and operations end. But then the other thing is, and this is what I talked about earlier, in terms of surrounding yourself with people who are doing the things that you want to do, find mentors. Because I found a mentor who was the CEO of the company I was working for, and I wanted to be like her. And I said, well, what do I need to do to be the CEO of a company like you are? And at the time, I was a manager. And she said, well, one of the things you might want to do is get an MBA. So that's exactly what I did. So I went to Florida International University in Miami, obtained an MBA, which is Master's of Business Administration. I have also a specialization in international business from there. And that's how I could get the credentials behind my name to legitimately apply for chief jobs, for VP chief jobs, and eventually chief executive officer jobs. And then from there, I went to Harvard and I finished there getting and continuing education is very important, you guys. So just getting, grabbing your degree is not enough. Continuing your education in whatever form that looks like is very, very important. So I finished at Harvard and I received a certificate in entrepreneurial management with an emphasis on AI because that's what's happening right now. That's what's important. So it's important to stay relevant if you want to move forward in your career. And that's how I managed to work my way from a marketing manager to a CEO of a large hospital.
And that's so cool because obviously your degree and your background is not in healthcare. I know your dad was a doctor, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
But your background and degree is not in healthcare. But
Nope.
because you've learned so many areas of business, that is what businesses need to run.
Yes.
You know, you oversee healthcare people, you oversee finance people, you oversee IT people, and then obviously especially in healthcare, and we talk about this in another class a lot. AI is really what is needed for a lot of these health informatics. So for people interested in tech, that is a great thing to get into. So,
That's a great thing to get into.
one thing I always go back to especially when it comes to you and me, and I try to tell this to kids all the time, and I'm glad you mentioned about inserting yourself. Because to be successful in business, you've got to sometimes go out of your comfort zone. You've got to be able to work with people that aren't exactly from your background, that you may think maybe I don't have a lot in common with them. But you've got to be able to sell, you've got to be able to talk, and you got to be able to communicate and being able to work with any kind of person. And I tell kids all the time, look, you have your group of friends, but get to know somebody else. Learn to work with other people. Learn to work with people that you think maybe aren't like you. It is amazing, first of all, what you can probably learn about somebody. And second, you can learn to work with literally any type of person, which makes you that much more marketable in business.
I'm so glad that you said that, Greg, because I mean, just even look at you and I. We have very different families and backgrounds and other things, but we have so much in common and we have learned so much from one another over the years. And that's why, and to your point, that's why it's important to have strong, solid mentors. And your mentors may not look like you, they're not mean. not come from your same background, they may not come from your same area, but it is extremely important to get outside of your comfort zone, to find mentors who are doing the things that you want to do. And those mentors can also put you in spaces that you may feel uncomfortable entering in on your own. So, for example, I was not in the space of lobbying. I was not a lobbyist. I didn't know anything about it. But if any of you go into healthcare and if you keep up with any of the things that are happening in politics or anything right now, you do need to be acutely aware of what's happening in the legislative end. And so I did not know how initially, I just inherently didn't know how to lobby, end up, at the state capitol or, in Washington, D.C. But my mentor made sure that she would send me to DC and say, you need to figure this out. And I figured it out. And it was uncomfortable for me, but I watched how other people moved and I watched what was happening and I studied and I learned a lot. And I continued my education about how do I successfully lobby to advocate for my organization. And those are things that I wouldn't have thought that I was in. Again, I'm a business major. I wasn't a healthcare, I didn't major in healthcare admin or anything of that nature. But I had to insert myself in places where now I do advocate on the state and federal level. Just for example, this is an organization that truly didn't get much on the end of state money. Let's just say when I started this organization about 4 years ago, we were probably about an $8 million organization with a and now we're about 24 million dollars net worth. Our organization is, and so we get a lot of state appropriations dollars and other sorts of things that we really do advocate on the state and federal level for. Those are all things I didn't know or even think about in high school. There weren't even things I thought about at the beginning of my career. But to your point, Greg, it is important to insert yourself in places where you're uncomfortable and surround yourself with people who don't necessarily look like you, who don't have backgrounds like you, because there's always something to learn from that. And as a business major, business is business, whether you're running a hospital or whether you're running a hamburger stand. The principles are the same, right? And if you want a successful hamburger stand, you might need to talk to the CEO of McDonald's, not necessarily someone, you know what I mean? Not necessarily someone in your neighborhood who may not be doing as great as the CEO of McDonald's or Burger King or whatever the case. So those same principles can be applied wherever you are.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, because a business degree, and I think the business department at Southern Miss is severely underrated. There are some absolutely great things going on. Obviously, we want our, for kids deciding to go to college, go to the best fit. But if you're considering majoring in business, really look at that business program at Southern Miss. I think they do a lot of great things. I was a business minor, got a lot of it myself, but it is such a transferable degree because
Mhm.
you can start in one space, get the great experience, have the great networking, and see a completely different field that needs somebody with a business background. So it really is
Absolutely.
an area you can work in several fields because, like you said, people in healthcare need people to run the business side of it. So it really is a degree that you can go several places. Now, before I get to their questions, and I've got a few here, just tell us a little bit about Lightshare and what you guys do there in the South Florida area when it comes to dealing with um, uh, the wellness
Yeah.
issues you guys deal with.
Absolutely. So I'll say I feel that, the generation that I won't say younger, the generation that comes after us, Greg, they are much more attuned to their mental health than generations prior. And so my organization treats people with mental health disorders. And also people with substance use disorders. And oftentimes we think, well, that's someone who has something very extreme going on. But it's not always, because all of us at one point or another have struggled with whether it's anxiety or depression or those sorts of things. And some people struggle with things that are very severe, for perhaps things like schizophrenia and other things. So we treat folks who are struggling with their mental health. We also treat people who, for one reason or another, needed to cope through illicit substances, unfortunately. And so we help them get back on their feet. We help them not only try to help them with their recovery journey, which is a lifelong journey for them. We also help them with employment. We help them with just basically redeeming their quality of life again. So we have inpatient units as well as outpatient medication treatment options as well.
Yeah, and that's awesome, man. And look, and I think the stigma is being lifted so much, especially in the Black community,
Yeah.
We have a lot of first generation Americans in our district now. In the international community, the stigma's being lifted. If anybody's dealing with any type of substance abuse issue or somebody in your family, there are so many places that are willing to help.
Yeah.
And I know you guys have an outpatient program as well. It's not something where you're going to have to be committed to the hospital, but there's always so many programs
So
that
many
can help you
options.
and your family. And it's nothing to be embarrassed about, nothing to
No,
be ashamed about. There's
no.
so many places that will help you or help you get through
Yes.
whatever you're dealing with.
And
And I
it's
just think that's so
important,
great.
like you said, I think with as time goes by, the stigma is being reduced, and that's important. It's very important to talk to your friends about how they're feeling, what's going on with them, check in with people, because it's just something that every family, all of us have to deal with in one extreme or another, you know.
Well, I do have some questions from the students, and I like these. They're asking some right stuff. So one of these, he heard our conversation before we started recording, and he's asking about that, and I'm glad he brought this up. But this is Amos Varnado. He's one of our football players here, and he asked, well, let me preface this. Like we said, you only had one loss in your high school tennis career, and it was extremely controversial. And I remember the next day we were sitting at lunch talking about it, and you were literally in tears because you were so upset. Now, this was right after you had brought Rob J and all of WLBT to Madison Central to announce your signing at Southern Miss because there was talk you were going to join the USTA tour, and you really considered it. But you had already signed your letter of intent with Southern Miss. You were three-time defending state champion, and you had your first loss to a player from St. Andrews that was extremely controversial. And I remember I said something about, I know this sucks, but you have to look at what's about to happen for you. And he asked, how did you feel after your first loss in high school?
Oh, Amos, that's a wonderful question. So, let me just say that it was something that I had to learn. Losing, and how you handle loss, is one thing, and it's the recovery after. And I'm the type of person who, if I'm going to lose, there's things that are just not going to work out in my favor. And I believe what is for me is for me. And I knew that I had, a very strong career moving forward. And so, although I did, and I cried, and I was with Greg, and I cried, but but I did have to bounce back from that. And I am definitely the type of person that is, you might see me down for a minute, but you're not gonna see me down for too long. And when I come back, I'm going to be even more dangerous. And that is how I operate in life in general. I'm like, okay, you might have got me that one time, but you're not going to get me again. Um, but I was very much looking forward to what I had to do and what I had to prove. When I went to Southern Miss, after that, I started there's 8 players on a team, only 6 players play, and they put me in the number 6 slot. So basically I was at the last slot. But I didn't let me tell you something. I didn't lose very many matches at that. And so I ended up moving forward at Southern Miss, and I ended up being the number 1 player.
Yeah, and that was and then I love how they build the great tennis facility after you graduate because I don't know if you've seen it because it is
Yes, it's
awesome.
beautiful.
Yeah, I like this one. This is Tredarius Quinn. He's one of our he's in the band here, and he asked, "How did you find out you love tennis, not seeing anyone else playing?"
So, Tradarius, I can't say that I loved tennis initially because it is hard when you don't see people who look like you. When you see people who look like you, it's much easier to envision yourself doing something. So I didn't know what that looked like. So I can't say I loved something that I wasn't quite sure how that was going to shake out for me. And I will tell you, unfortunately, there is racism and other things. So I was called every name in the book, right? So there were points at which that it wasn't um, as fun, right? I think what I focused on more so than the love of the game was what I could benefit from it. And I didn't want anyone to take anything away from me. And what I knew is that I could get college paid for, which was important to me. That was the goal. The goal was to be on a full scholarship, and I was going to do that. So less me loving the game and more me loving myself and what I knew that I wanted to accomplish in the future. And I knew that I had worked hard enough to have someone pick me up at their university, and I had several different offers. But that's really what I loved more is what I could accomplish through whatever adversity that I had to go through without being able to see someone who looked like me.
And it was so cool because so many people would come and watch you play just because because you were not only because you were awesome, but because you were, like we said, the first. I like this question. This is just Kayla Green, one of our cheerleaders, and she asked, "What was it that really made you say yes? I'll get into this field."
You know what's interesting is again, it had more to do with finding mentors. I finished graduate school, and my dad is a surgeon, and we had a long talk about career paths and other things. And networking is very, very important, just for all of you to know. So I networked my way into getting my first healthcare job when I was actually still in graduate school. So, and for those of you, internships and things are sort of important. And that's what kind of sparked my interest in healthcare. And that's how I knew the field that I wanted to be in. So don't just think you just automatically pop out and say, oh, I know what I want to do. You may not, so you might want to try interning at places. Even in high school, you can still do that, volunteer at places. So then you can sort of develop what you might be interested in.
Yeah, and we always the old saying is it's not what you know, it's who you know. I take it one step farther, it's who knows you. And I
That's
say
right.
this with everybody, whether you play sports in college or not. Going to class and getting a great GPA is great, but you've got to have that student organization experience, have those internships. People have to know who you are. People aren't
That's
just going to
right.
find you. Nobody is that important.
That's right.
There, you can count them on one hand. You've got to still be able to network yourself. That it goes back to, like we said, being uncomfortable, meet new people, go and walk in a room and introduce yourself. You never
Right.
know who was there. It literally can be life changing just to take that one simple step.
That's right. Absolutely.
I got time for two more. This is Derek Dozier. He's one of our football players, and he asked, "What was the hardest part about the business major that you had at Southern Miss?"
Eric. So I think one of the hardest things was business is a really challenging degree, not to diminish any other degrees that are very, very challenging, because I'm sure that I couldn't do half of the things that they offered there. But you know what? I'm going to point out a class. So I am not inherently a statistician, but the stats classes were very challenging, and that took a lot of extra time. And so between going to practice, going to the weight room, being on the road, because just know, Derek, that when you are an athlete in college, you are not in class a lot because you're traveling a lot and you're in playing tournaments and you're on the road and you're playing. So missing classes in classes that aren't necessarily your strength is challenging. But it is really important to, again, kind of networking and who you know. It's important to get to talk and have your professors know who you are, because there'll be a lot more uh, compassion around helping you when your professors know who you are, what you're doing, know what you are really trying to do, knowing where your struggles are, and they will help you. And it's important to let people know when you need help so that they will help you get through those
Yeah,
things.
and that's
That
a
was
good
probably my
point
biggest
too,
challenge.
because I've never been a numbers person either. And I had an accounting class and I missed one time and it was like Chinese going the next time. And I was like, man, I am never missing this class again or I'm going to freaking fail. So I'm with you on that. Now, I got time for one more. This is Shanaria Lewis. She asked, what was it about this career that has made you so happy?
Shanaria, that is a wonderful question, and I'm glad that we are that you asked me that. Um, the most important thing and the thing I value most about being in this career is that at the end of the day, someone is being helped on the other end. In my field, that might mean someone stays alive. And for me, the all of the headaches and the nightmares that come with, staying up late and legislative changes and, staff, I have managed a staff of, I have 300 employees. All of those things, you can get caught up in the minutia of all of that. But when you think about it, at the end of the day, there's someone who is alive at the end of it, someone who stayed alive because of the work that the 300 people here did that maybe wouldn't have made it through, or someone who thought about whether it had to do with, substances or whatever else, and got help from a counselor, or maybe was just admitted on a unit for a few days and just needed some respite. That's what keeps me going in this career field. And I've been in healthcare for over 20 years now, and I don't see that changing at all. And that's what's most fulfilling to me about being in this career field. And that's what makes it worth it for me.
That's awesome. Well, we're almost out of time, and as always, it is such a pleasure to have you with us. And I know Miss Ware would be so proud to see two of her former choir members doing this all these years later. But before we go, a couple things. First of all, we mentioned how, and people, and I have to hear people have to hear you say it because nobody believes me that we used to have me and you used to have some of the deepest conversations. When you were a senior, I was a sophomore, and I mean, I was riding around in your car and everything. But how important is it to get outside your comfort zone and get to know someone different than you to just make you not only a better person, but to make you better in business?
Yes. You know what? I'm grateful for, when we talk about stepping outside of our comfort zone, we both were in choir, we both had other things to do, but we decided to do something that might have been, or we might have been different for us, both, interested in music and other things. And it's so important, and especially the connection that you and I had, because we learned so much about one another. And I think that that kind of sparked other relationships that I developed in the future in terms of, well, you know what, this is really interesting. And just really finding the good in people, finding what's interesting about other people, asking a lot of questions, being really inquisitive about, well, why do you do this thing? Or going, when I was in college, I'd meet people in Tennessee and they maybe lived in different states or even different countries, and saying, well, you know what, I'll go home with you for spring break and hang out with you guys' family and do other things. You're you will truly grow as a human being, and you will truly grow in your career when you begin to do that. Also, you'll learn how to move in different spaces where you're not necessarily as quite as comfortable. Maybe you didn't grow up in a country club of, different sort of, or maybe you didn't grow up in places where there's certain things that you might have to do, but you'll learn how to move in certain ways that are truly important for your career. Because depending on whatever you do, whether you run a hospital or run a hamburger stand, you're going to have to network and be in places and spaces that are going to be very different for you. And you have to have that comfort level to be able to move in those spaces. So,
Yeah. Now, and the last thing before we go, it's no coincidence that I have you every Black History Month to speak, just because of the all the great records you set in Mississippi. So, why is it so important, especially for these young Black kids, to really consider moving into the business administration space? Because it is a field that, as every other field, really needs a mixed bag of people, leadership roles.
in majoring in business in general is really valuable because you can move that around anywhere. In the healthcare space, it's really, really important because we all seek healthcare. We all need healthcare, and our outcomes are better when there's a more diverse group of people caring for your health in whatever capacity, whether that's on the provider end and helping a client or a patient, or whether it's on the administrative end, and you're looking at health outcomes and other things as a whole, as an organization. It is important to have every sort of face, background, ability when you're in the healthcare field, because you are literally seeing everybody, and it's not, even though there might be niche markets like psychiatry or the things, it's not limited. The faces are not limited to, and they're not, just one type of face and that's it. That's just not how it works. So it's really, really important that you insert yourself. There are not very many Black CEOs, and there are even fewer Black women CEOs. So I want to say, of women in general, there might be only maybe 10% of the market. And so you can only imagine what that looks like for minority women. So it's extremely important for us to be in these spaces. So I would hope that you all would even just consider what that looks like, and use your network to move into careers
Absolutely.
like that.
Absolutely. Well, as always, it is just such a pleasure. Shawny Robey, CEO of Lightshare Wellness, 1998 Madison Central graduate. It's just always just amazing to see how far we both have come. But we thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for fitting us in your busy schedule, and we will talk to you soon. But before we go to the top,
Thank you. Southern Miss to the top.
all right, see you, buddy.
Bye.